Okay, so now pulling handle on a pot. So this is pretty firm leather hard, but still soft enough that I can scratch it up and feels a little bit wet. So the place that you're going to attach the handle, scratch up, slightly smaller than your attachment point. The other thing is the attachment point will be bigger than you, well, traditionally will be bigger than you might expect.
And this is the same if you were going to just stick one of these on? Not really.
Yeah, it, yeah, probably it is. Yeah, I did a scratch, wet, scratch. So you can use slip, but this is easy because you're just kind of creating slip with the clay you've already got. And the other thing is that it also kind of ensures that you're actually creating a wet zone in the clay, because the more gradual the transition between the dryness of the two clays, the more likely your handle is to stay on. Okay, so I've got this scratched up area, and then I'm also going to wet the area around it because that will help the clay stay on while I'm pulling it, which is extremely helpful. And you don't always have to scratch up the bottom, but I will a little bit, just a little bit anyway. The bottom of your pot is often wetter than the top, and gravity is on your side there, which it isn't on the top, so things don't usually pop off the bottom, they usually only pop off the top. Okay, so your pot's prepared. Take your little slug of clay in your hand and hold it maybe a centimeter below the top. And then what I'm going to do is try to thicken up the end. So I'm going to whack it without squeezing too much. I'm going to try to hold it in place without squeezing it too much, and I've got my pinky underneath to sort of also hold it up. And what I'm trying to do is get a kind of an oval cross section at the end. It's a little bit wider and maybe a little bit dented in the middle because it's going to go onto a curved surface. Okay. And the more even this is, the better. But okay, so now I've got this thing going on. Okay. You don't have to wet this, whether you scratch it or not. I don't know. You can scratch it. Okay. Then to stick it on, put your hands in. Always put your hands inside your pot so you don't deform it too much, and make sure your handle's sort of opposite your spout if you're making a jug, and push it and wiggle it until you can feel it it's caught. It shouldn't be sliding anymore. Okay? If it's sliding, it's not attached. If it's not, then that's a good start. From this point on, you don't want to let this flop around. Okay? But at this point, it's really strong, so it's it's not doing too much. Okay, so now dry hands. I'm going to this is a technical term. Squidge the clay down onto the pot, and this is just a little tiny movement where I'm just just working that clay down onto the pot, and this is to sort of seal it on. And I don't worry about the top, but I'll tell you the sides. If you don't get the sides really well attached, they start to peel up while you're pulling, and then your handle can fall off. I don't like demonstrating this because, it doesn't happen as much now, but for a long time I had that problem. It would just come off. But this is where wetting the clay on the sides, even if you don't scratch it up, helps that whole thing stick. Okay, so once I've got that all sealed and I've just sort of wiped across, you want to clean this bit up a little bit if you can now, because once the handle's on, it's harder to get in there. Okay, that's it. So support it with your hand, turn it over, and then you can hold your pot however is comfortable for you and how big it is. Okay, and now you're going to do basically the same thing as you did before, only instead of holding a knob at the top, you've got this. So your pot's going to be over the border. The first thing you do is smooth out any bumps that you've put into it, and this is why if you pull that, you're at an advantage. Otherwise you've got like this, you're trying to do this whole weird lumpy thing. And just start flattening it. Again, in the beginning I find it just takes a little while for it to start moving. And now, this is where it gets tricky. Depends on the kind of handle you want. I like my handle to be a little bit fatter again at the bottom. And the other thing, and this, the kind of handle that I sort of like the best is called a Minnesota handle, because a lot of people from Minnesota do this. The handle gets thinner right here and then thicker as it goes down to the bottom. Duncan Shearer makes this kind of handle. And so when you bend the handle over, it actually gets thicker here again. So you end up, what you're trying to do is have a thin point here, but you don't want your handle to fall off. So while you're doing it. So what I'm doing is I'm gonna try to leave a little bit of clay at the bottom without letting the top get too weak too quickly. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about both of those things while I'm pulling. And it also will get a little bit narrower from that connection point if I do it well. I'm not that great at this, but yeah. And now I'm curving. So now I'm curving my this finger around to narrow it down a little bit and straighten it out. When I'm flattening, I have my fingers not around the side, and then when I want to narrow it to the other side, I change that. Okay, another thing to remember is that this clay is always wetter than your jug, especially if you're pulling it on the pot. And so this has already shrunk some. So your handle will look a little bit smaller and thinner than it does when you put it on, when everything's completely dried. So that's something to think about. Okay, and the other thing is when I got to the point that I could actually pull thin handles, I made my handles too thin because I didn't realize there was such a thing as too thin, but there is. So I'm gonna stop now. And you see how this just gets a little bit thicker down there? I'm probably gonna have to cut some of that off anyway. But now that I've got the thickness I want, I'm gonna go back in here and actually make this what to me is always alarmingly thin, to try to get it to not look too thick when I fold it over. And the angle that I'm pulling on, this is all very traditional what I'm telling you, and obviously you can make different aesthetic choices, but what I'm aiming for when I do this is to have the negative space inside the handle rising up, but on the outside not rising up. If I do it well, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so you see how thin that is there right now? Okay, so now I'm going to bend it over. So I grab the end and I tip my pot up and sort of hold it where I think I want it, and check that it's straight. I'm very bad at making things straight. And then I'll just stick that on there, and I cut it a little bit long because then I bang the clay up to thicken it up a little more. So, towel handy, dry your hand off. The moment I stop pulling, I want my hand dry again, so I don't make marks all over the place. Sorry, that's all yuck. So, just, you need to make sure this is actually attached without deforming it too much. So I'm just trying to push it on. And then what I do is I just, at the bottom, just once it's attached, so it's gonna not move, I push this up a little. Again, this is just what I do. The ways of attaching handles. A lot of people do the fishtail thing. The one thing I'll say is if your pot is too dry, if your pot's very dry, I don't recommend that, because then you've got this thin smear of wet clay on a dry pot, and it almost always cracks through there. This, if it's going to crack, will crack more in the attachment line, which is much easier to hide with glaze. So I tend to define I tend to define things as separate rather than trying to attach them, and then you can also go over the top. I'm actually not gonna, I'm gonna leave that for now. So then, and then I'll just go back and see that's all fallen weirdly, but I can pull that. And as it dries a little, I can just adjust it if it's not perfect. But I don't know, do you see how that doesn't look as thin now as it did when I was pulling it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, if it looks, yeah, it's just, I don't know if it's because it's actually compressing as it folds or it's just a visual thing, but it will look thicker once you've bent it over than it did when you were pulling it. Okay, yeah, and once it's a little bit dry, you can come back and mess with it and tidy up finger marks and stuff like that, but that's the basic process.